24. But it's very tractable. It will happily amble along at 2 to 2,500 revs. Even in 4th gear, you could drive it to lunch or to the shops. Engine runs at a cool temperature. The red line is at 6,000. You feel like it's a car that you can cover some distance in. What state your hair might be in at the end is another matter. You'll definitely be smiling. The first owner of this car ordered it as a road car to drive around his native Bournemouth, sleepy town on the English south coast. He was obviously a man used to adrenaline, as just 10 years before he'd served in the Second World War in nothing less than the Special Boat Service, which is effectively the marine version of the SAS. The speedometer is graduated to 160 miles an hour. There's not an awful lot, as you can hear, in the way of weather protection. Shift down a gear and step on the accelerator. You'll see what I mean. Gentlemen, good afternoon.
Hello, Simon.
Hi, Julian. How's
Good
it going?
to see you. How did you drive?
I'll tell you in a second, Chris.
Simon, good to see you.
How's it going?
Very well, thank you.
Thank you for letting us interrupt your hectic workflow
No problem.
for a post-drive debrief on the DB3S. And the answer is, I hadn't driven that car, that specific car, for over 30 years. That was a wee thing. And I didn't really know what to expect today. But I was pleasantly surprised. It's unbelievably tractable. But when you push the loud pedal, it really goes, doesn't it?
Yes.
How, Chris, you are, I should say, the, not just British, but worldwide guru for this type of car.
Can't you say
But
that?
your dad worked on these cars as part of the Aston Martin racing team back in the 50s when they were brand new. And you've continued that family tradition. So we can't necessarily show everything in this workshop, but you probably work on more of these cars, or have worked on more of them than anybody in the world. That's probably a fair statement, isn't it?
Good chance, yeah.
Yeah.
Very lucky. Production cars and works cars, racing, road.
And for those of us, myself included, who are not fully steeped in DB3S law, remind us of the numbers. Works cars and production cars. Do you know those numbers off by?
Works cars 11.
And production cars?
20.
20?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the works cars have twin plug head?
Not all of them.
Okay.
They went over to twin plug.
And the customer cars are all single, right?
There were a few that were specified and a few maybe unspecified
Okay.
that grew twin pluggers. Yeah.
So we're talking about 32 cars basically in total, I think that's right, isn't it? 31
31.
cars. 31 cars.
Yeah.
Built between 54
Probably 53, I think.
for the early cars,
Mm,
and 56 for the very last
right
ones,
the way
right?
through, yeah. Sort of 10, 11, 10 being the wishbone car right at the end, yeah.
And what is a DB3S in Aston Martin history? Where does it sit?
Gorgeous. I think it's kind of the sports racing car before the racing cars really went to another level,
When you
like the
couldn't,
DBR1.
when you
where
couldn't really drive them on the road anymore.
You can, but you said the word tractable, and I think
Yeah.
that is the case. I mean, you could take that to the circuit, you could run very competitively, as they did in period, and drive it home happily with a big smile on your face.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a few flies in your teeth.
Why not?
Oh, why not? Julian, you have
project managed this restoration, and it's taken a while.
It has.
What have been the main challenges, and what are you most proud of in that restoration?
The overall looks of the car, I think, are stunning. We've pushed it to the absolute limits. Paint, the shape, worked with a great body guy, Charlie Briggs, who I've worked with for 5 years, so we understand each other.
I should say, of course, that you are, I hope you don't mind me introducing you as, or explaining you as the brother of, but obviously brother
You may,
of,
but I have a
brother of Marek,
background.
but you have an Aston Martin background of your own.
I also have a design, automotive design teaching background. I've also done clay modelling, and I've done alias design. And I've worked with Charlie, so I understand the materiality of working with a flat sheet of aluminium and love the synergy between tailoring and making a car body. And I've learnt a hell of a lot from Charlie as to how you actually construct it. And for me, understanding the construction of the cars is key to a restoration. So combining the materials and the construction techniques and how Charlie improves what was done in period, and what I've learned about surfacing and getting the tension. So if you look at the lines on the car, they're absolutely as pure as we could ever get them, almost to modern A-class standards.
Like the crease on the top of the
So
wings
if you
and
look
the bonnet.
down the car,
Yep.
that line is a absolutely straight cut, and that's what makes the beauty of the car for me. We call it tension, and it's about the curvature. So if you take a ruler and you put tension in one end, you get that beautiful curve.
Yeah.
And that tension goes all the way through the car. And that's what we try and achieve on every surface in the car. And it's called A-class surfacing. And it's something Charlie understands, the painters understand, and what I do is push that surfacing, you know, right from the start of building the body to the finished polish of the car. And we spent 140 hours just flatting and polishing the finish of the paint, let alone the hours in the body.
How much more difficult was it to preserve the original bodywork on this car rather than, as many people have done on other cars in the past, just start again?
Ideally, we would have started again, but the instruction was to preserve the body, which is great. But it presented a few challenges in that, first of all, the creases on the body, when we do them today, we would hammer the crease into a flat panel, whereas what they did was to take 2 patches of aluminium and weld along the crease.
Okay.
So any weld distortion gets projected into that crease, and you can't move it. So when we were restoring it, we had to very, very carefully keep that as sharp as we could and straighten it. But to make it worse, the car had had a little tap on the front, it had a few little taps on the back, there was a lot of corrosion. So the nose section and the underscuttle were both bent, and we had to kind of replace those sections. And there were a couple of cracks in the tops of the wing where the stress had actually cracked the welds. So we had to very carefully cut those out and replace them with new metal.
And how long did all of that take in terms of months, or dare I even say perhaps years?
That was probably over a year's work.
Just to do that?
Yeah. But we have photographs of the car in bare metal, sanded in one direction like you would do a carbon fibre car, and it shows the highlights in the car, the crease down the bonnet, the crease down the fenders, and the beautiful shoulder lines, which are very typically Aston Martin.
I think it's important to emphasise, as I hear you speaking, just how many of these cars, and I don't mean necessarily DB3Ss alone, but 50s sports racing cars, or 50s and 60s sports racing and pure competition cars, how few of them have actually survived with their original bodies, because for such a long time it was considered easier and better to make a new body, which would be perfect. Chris, you've known these cars, can I say forever, although we're about the same age.
Yeah.
In your experience, how many of those cars, what percentage of those cars do you think survive with their original bodywork?
Very few.
Very few.
Like you said, for the reasons you said, there's age, and of course they were, most of them were raced as well.
Yeah.
And inevitably you're going to get damage. So, I mean, we see cars and you look at repairs that have been done over the years and you think, my God, how could somebody do that? But you've got to remember that there was a long period of time when they were just redundant race cars. everybody's seen the adverts in the motorsport or something where you could buy a car like this for £1,000 or something, and people say, well, I'm not paying that, you know, you must be mad. And you'd see repairs that looked like they'd been done in, you know, the local blacksmith, but that's what they did.
Sure.
And then you say, you know, Julian's talking about going to the extreme in one direction, and that's the extreme in the other direction. And where, you know, what do you want to do with the car, and what do you want at the end of the day? That's, you know.
So our challenge was to unpick all that time, you know, people just keeping it running. The car had been raced in clubman racing.
Sure.
So they'd fitted
very competitively. I remember it being raced against it many times.
And as a result, that gave it lots of stress cracks.
Sure.
They'd done lots of modifications. I remember talking to you about the rear anti-roll bar that they'd fitted, which we considered to be dangerous, that we had to have pieces turned and welded into the chassis to put it back to original shock absorber mounts. The rear fuel tank, that had had a tank welded into it of a more normal size, you might say. So we had to take, well, body off, tank out. We had to cut the tank open, take out the tank that had been fitted, then modify the brass fuel pipes to be correct shape.
Well, people were less concerned about the originality. They wanted performance and they wanted reliability. And if that meant, you know, small tank, safety tanks, and of course you had the harnesses. So what did you put the harnesses onto? You end up putting eyelets in and seats and da-di-da, went on and on.
I think on the plus side, these days, obviously the cars are worth a lot more money and people can justify spending money to have them properly restored. And they are, albeit one might argue, to an even better cosmetic finish, but nonetheless they are representative of how they were in the period without modern add-ons and improvements either for performance or for even for safety. I mean, if you're going to race a car like that hard, you are inevitably going to detract in the long run from its originality.
Yes.
Do you mind if we take a look under the bonnet? Because I've enjoyed driving this car, but I haven't actually looked at the engine yet. Chris, I'm going to let you do this because I sell cars. You restore them.
Chris, do we have a bonnet prop? Oh, it's got to stay. We're okay.
So, talk us through the mechanicals of a DB3S. Engine size?
2922.
Yeah.
Straight six?
Yep.
Weber carbs always?
Yes. 3S was Weber's.
Same size between the team cars and the private cars?
No, they went bigger on the team cars. They went up to, these are 40 DC03s, so the original sandcast.
Yep.
So absolutely pucker carburetors.
Now, for people who don't know, sandcast means cast in
the old way, rather than die cast stuff now that you get, which is so instantly recognisable.
by the different surface.
Yeah, and they're slightly different in the way they're laid out with the accelerator pumps and pistons in here, operated by this lever.
Yep.
And quality, they work.
Yeah.
So the carb did come on some Spanish carbs, which I think, Simon, you managed to source
Find
the original carbs.
Well, that went through even up to the GTs, and then it was later they went from Italy to Spain, and then the quality really dropped off.
Yeah.
But yeah, the works cars, they went bigger up to 45 and even 48, I think, in some instances.
So single plug on the customer cars and one or two perhaps of the works cars. Straight six engine with how many horsepower originally, do you reckon?
Upwards of 200. Yeah.
So even then they would get over 200 out of that engine.
I would say a good one could come off at around 200, and then a bit more for the twin plugger.
What will it rev to comfortably?
We say 6. I mean, they're still on chains. They're not gear driven. So we aim for torque rather than.
It's torquey, yes.
Yeah. That's what I noticed today.
Yeah, exactly.
It will pull. It's very easy to drive. It will pull smoothly from 1,000 revs.
Sure.
I only got it to cough back once or twice just because I was pussyfooting around and not accelerating enough. But very, very tractable. Yeah. And the temperature hovered around about 85, 90 degrees Celsius. Really no problems at all. Gear change easy.
Yeah,
Very easy.
synchro mesh and
Yeah.
second,
Beautifully
third, and
positive.
fourth.
Yeah, no
gear
synchro mesh
change.
on first.
No,
Reverse gear, if you don't know what you're doing, which I clearly don't. A challenge to engage sometimes.
it was effectively two firsts,
got a
so
line.
two straight gears with no
Yeah.
synchro.
Right.
The
okay.
trick being generally
Gotta
just
line
to
the
sneak
front foot.
second on the synchro,
Ah, right,
which stops
okay.
everything, and
Yeah,
then
go
you're
into
in.
reverse after second. I
Yeah.
should have thought of that.
But yeah, not the fastest gearbox in the world, but
But
pretty good,
positive
as
and
it should
feels-
be
yeah,
from
and
David
feels-
Brown.
Yeah, that's what he did make his money making gearboxes. didn't
Gearbox
he?
man, yes.
Feels quick. Feels quick. I suppose we went up to about 80-ish just on the road, and good acceleration. And I didn't really floor it, mindful of the fact that the engine was rebuilt not very long ago, but that's quick for 1955. The only thing I can think that is on a par or slightly faster is a D-type, but definitely faster than a C-type. Obviously faster than something like a Gullwing. Exciting and noisy.
It's even more exciting when you get it on a race circuit, and the handling is just exquisite.
Yeah,
And at first I was concerned about the Avon tyres,
because these are cross plies, of course.
Yeah,
as,
they're
as
cross
the
plies.
originals.
and not having driven a fast car on cross plies, I was a little bit tentative and thought, oh, we better get the owner some radial tyres. But no, these things are beautiful. They give you so much warning they're breaking away
Yeah,
that even a relative amateur like myself could actually feel it breaking away, and you can handle it it's so beautiful to drive.
what does a DB3S owner need to know? What are the tips that you would give somebody who had never owned a car like this before, maybe was thinking of doing so? The pros, the cons, any weak points, anything? What would you tell to somebody thinking of buying a car like this?
You might get wet. Clearly, there's no roof, but just a glorious thing to get on the open road and, as you said, enjoy the power, and in particular the handling. I think that's what in period was about, the handling rather than the power. You know,
How sweet handling it was, like a Maserati 300S, I guess.
well, I'm talking really people that were racing them in period. You know, this and then onto the DBR one later. It was always the handling was where they excelled.
Didn't have any vices.
No,
Didn't
no,
bite the driver.
light and just, you know, a great suspension layout that was well proven. Von Oberhorst and Porsche front suspension and the Dion at the back, and it was, you know, just a lovely thing.
What about you, Julian? What about the restoration? What are you most proud? What were the biggest challenges apart from the body, and what are you most proud of?
Just the overall end result, and yeah, to take it to Paris with yourself, it was just beautiful seeing it standing there proud amongst concourse level cars, and the paint is just stunning.
And we
Absolutely
should
stunning.
emphasise it's the only DB3S in that colour,
It's-
Moonbeam Grey.
It's in its original colours, the original Connolly leather colour, and the original grey paint.
Yeah, very understated for a 3S, isn't it? Because normally you'd see one in green.
Sure.
You might see one in, well, this used to be red for a period of its life, but thanks to you gentlemen, it's now, and Charlie, now back to the original livery that the first owner would have received it in back in 1955.
Yeah.
Special Boat Services Commando. You have to be quite a ballsy person, and he obviously was, to buy a DB3S, brand new, and a rich one, in 1955, to use as a road car. Can you imagine that? What it must have been like on the road. For people to see this car on the road back then, going down to the shops or perhaps driving across Salisbury Plain on a Sunday morning.
Sure. Be an eye opener.
Yeah.
Just a bit.
Having seen you drive it today, you
Badly.
can imagine. No, you drove
But
it well.
makes you think, doesn't it? I mean,
On a beautiful
people-
day like today, just to see it on the
on
roads.
days like these. You think about people today driving in a Chiron or a, I don't know, Valkyrie, which makes an impression. But this in 1955
Back then,
would have been even more impressive
Something
because
else,
people were
yeah.
driving around, a lot of them still in pre-war cars
yeah.
or an Austin 7 or something, and this rolls up behind you, you're going to,
Looked like a spaceship.
yeah.
Yeah.
And sounds like a Spitfire. right?
Yeah. But even today, the feedback from the car to you as a driver, I just absolutely love. You can feel that. It's almost like you're touching the road.
Yeah.
You can feel the tyres. The steering is so precise, you know. Yeah, the inputs and even the brakes. It's like you have to use the brakes. It's just exquisite to drive.
They really got it right on this car, didn't they?
Yes.
I suppose that's the sign of a classic, when something frequently unexpectedly reached a peak in its period, which was then very difficult to replicate later on. And as you said, Chris, after this period, race cars became less usable on the road. And this is pretty much, for an open sports racing car, the end of the period when you could drive it down to the shops or win Le Mans.
It was a high point for sure.
Yeah.
And you were talking about the look, and Julian said about the overall appearance, and different cars and people have different tastes, but I'm yet to meet someone that wouldn't look at a 3S and fall in love with it. The tastes wouldn't vary, wouldn't say, no, not keen, because it is just, I mean,
nobody,
gorgeous,
car
just
person
stunningly
or not,
gorgeous.
male or female, is going to look at that and say, well, that's not very good looking.
No.
In terms of line and tension, I mean, Jaguar were very soft, but they didn't have what we would call a tension line. And if you talk to Marek, he'll talk about tension and lines in a car, and that's how you create tension. This car has it back in the 50s.
Yeah.
And the tension is all the way through. And
Yeah, this
the
lovely,
line running, the
very,
crease
very
down the middle.
subtle crease down the middle. Obviously
And look at-
the wings, and then all the way through the scuttle.
Look at the line through the tail. For that to follow, we spent hours, and Charlie will tell you, getting that line and just to be symmetrical from side to side, because it wasn't, because of the little taps it had on the tail, you know, and to get that sharp and get the valleys that, you know, once again, I'm coming from an alias and clay modelling background, to get that fillet to be consistent. And if you look at the highlight in the paint, it's totally consistent.
Whilst we've got you gentlemen here, let's just walk the novice through some of the features of the car. Now, if we go to the cockpit, obviously they're all right-hand drive. They're never made in left-hand drive. Correct me if I'm wrong. Wood-rimmed steering wheel. Main gauge obviously is the rev counter. Doesn't have a red line. Just reads up to 6K, 6,000 revs. These are the instrument lights, or dashboard lights, I should say.
There's one guy in the country that rebuilds electronic speedo and rev counter.
Okay, that's it.
Yeah.
So these are the dashboard lights, correct?
Correct.
And they basically cast a glow over the whole of the dashboard.
So they're not
face.
illuminated internally. It's
Not illuminated internally. 4-speed gearbox, as we've said. Interestingly, no passenger door. This comes off to carry a passenger if you want to.
Yes.
So that metal tonneau with these fasteners just comes off, and there's a separate windscreen that goes on. Do they all have a speedometer, Chris, or not?
Production cars.
Production cars do.
Yeah.
Works cars do not.
Correct.
So all production cars, regardless of whether they were raced or not, have a speedometer.
As far as I'm aware.
Okay. And then we've got the secondary controls, fan, electric fan.
Spotlights, potentially, if you want to use them, and then a spare switch.
Okay,
And
that's
then on
a
the
spare one.
Right hand side, you've got the ignition on.
Ignition on,
and
start button,
button.
side lights and headlights. And that's your lot.
Yes.
Dipper and a horn underneath.
Ah, yes.
Which are a modern addition, but
Horn. You drive an Aston Martin, you need a horn. Yeah, so we've got indicators there.
That's
Very
an
accessible.
add-on.
Not. Which is an add-on for
That's
radio
the idea.
Yeah. Although
Discreet.
It's possible that he could have had those, if he was using it, if the first owner was using this car as a road car, which we know he was, that he could have specified it with
no,
indicators.
they weren't. They
Not
weren't
sure.
fitted.
Not sure anybody.
They weren't
would-
fitted,
No.
okay. So no indicators
ever did
originally.
that. No.
And then the horn in the place where you'll be able to get to it about 2 seconds
Yeah.
after you needed it.
And your dip switch on the
And
horn,
your dipper switch.
which
Yeah.
is the old sort of bake
Yeah.
light.
So
Talk
you,
us through Aston Martin's idea of a fuel gauge in 1955.
you have a hole in the body.
A hole
And
in the
then
body with a window.
In the tank itself, you have a perspex window, so that you can look into the dark chasm and hopefully see the fuel level.
So whilst you're driving along, the idea being you just casually peek back here and see how much fuel you've got. And then the filler, well, there's no messing around there, is there?
No, well, you can actually see how much fuel is in there as
Give
well.
them some credit, Simon. They do have a main and a reserve pickup.
I can smell how much fuel's
You
in.
get an idea of where you were, and then you always had a bit of reserve before you
Okay.
To get you to the
so
fuel station.
Is there a
You-
switch on there?
there
the
is
There is a
indeed.
Okay,
switch,
so-
and that's really interesting because it's actually off a Spitfire.
Really?
Yes. Yeah.
Don't tell the Germans. Gentlemen, I've learnt more in the last 15 minutes than the last a long time. But
It's been a great learning process for me, and thanks to Chris for all your help and advice.
You missed the air
because-
conditioning. The pull knob underneath the indicators,
Are you-
which
you are
opens,
serious?
the
Yes.
flap
Yeah.
beyond
And
the
now
pedals.
Now you tell me. Well, I'm going to have to go out again and try it out. Brilliant craftsmanship and expertise.
They've done a great
And
job.
it's great.
You too, mate. I couldn't have done it without you.
It's great.
It's been a
that-
great journey.
It's great that places like this still exist. Improbable as they may be.
I'll agree.
If I may say, you wouldn't know driving up that this is the world epicenter for this type of car. But
That's the idea.
70-year tradition. Long may it continue.
Thank you. Good to see you.
I'm going to go out
Thank you, Simon.
for another drive. And
Enjoy.
thank you both very, very much indeed. I've loved it. Absolutely loved it. Really have.